Before streaming became second nature, before recommendations were automated by algorithms, and movie nights started with the tap of a screen, there was a ritual that played out in countless homes across the world. The simple act of getting in the car and heading to the local video rental store. Whether it was a neon-lit Blockbuster on the edge of a strip mall or a tiny independent shop wedged between a laundromat and a Chinese takeaway, was a kind of ceremonial start to the weekend. The moment you stepped through the doors, there was a shift. You were no longer in your neighborhood, you were in a gallery of stories. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a faint hum over the muffled sound of a movie trailer playing on the mounted TV behind the counter. The air carried a strange blend of plastic, popcorn, and worn carpet. Walls were lined with shelves stacked with clamshell VHS cases. Some new and pristine, others worn and battered as if they'd lived many lives in many VCRs. There was the unmistakable adrenaline rush of heading to the new releases wall and scanning quickly, heart-pounding, wondering if that one movie you'd been dying to see was still there. If it was, you grabbed it with relief and triumph. If it wasn't, well, you moved on. But not without a silent grudge against whoever got to it first. That was the magic of the 90s video rental experience. It wasn't just about the movie, it was about the hunt, the chance, the possibility. Picking a movie wasn't a task, it was an adventure. It was wandering through aisles like a low-stakes explorer, navigating cardboard spines and gaudy cover art. It was standing frozen, holding 2 or 3 tapes in your hand, unable to decide which one would make or break your evening. It wasn't just about the film, it was about the vibe, the promise. You had no online reviews to go by. No, people also liked suggestions. You judged a film based on its cover, its title, the look in the lead actor's eye. Sometimes the only clues were a handful of exaggerated blurbs and a few faded stills on the back. And those blurbs, a non-stop thrill ride. You'll laugh and cry. Usually came from publications no one had ever heard of. But you took them at face value. You had to. There was no safety net, no preview clips, no immediate plan B. You were all in. And of course, there was the battle of the formats, VHS versus Betamax. It was more than just plastic and tape. It was a divide in homes, a source of snobbery and frustration. Betamax had the better quality, they said. Sharper picture, cleaner sound. But VHS had the volume, the titles, the momentum. Most kids grew up with VHS, the familiar chunk of plastic that always needed rewinding. And when you forgot to rewind, you knew. You could hear it in the way the clerks sighed when they opened the case and saw the tape still at the end. Some families clung to Betamax like it was gospel, like it proved they were on the right side of history. But history didn't care. VHS won. And the rest of us learned how to spin the reels with a pen when the player chewed up the tape. But there were always those oddball rentals, the ones you picked up again and again until the sleeve was faded and frayed and the tape itself had a permanent warp. We all had our go-to comfort films. Maybe it was DuckTales the movie, with its mix of childhood innocence and mild peril. Maybe it was Curly Sue, a staple in homes where John Hughes was considered essential viewing. But just as often, there was that one truly weird title you rented once out of curiosity, and then kept going back to, though you never could fully explain why. Something like Into the Groove, a film you couldn't even find a proper summary for, just a ridiculous cover, a title that sounded like a Madonna B-side, and a vague memory of laughing too hard at a joke that probably wasn't that funny. These tapes never got the digital re-release treatment. They weren't bought by boutique Blu-ray distributors or featured on anniversary lists. They faded into oblivion, lost to time, to broken machines, to garage sales and Goodwill bins. They were the forgotten films that still somehow managed to burn themselves into our memory. Not because they were great, but because they were ours. Because they came with a moment, a night, a friend, a feeling. They were ghosts on magnetic tape, and we loved them. Also, the creepy back room was always there, tucked away behind a faded curtain or a warped wooden door with a little handwritten sign that said, "Adults Only," in shaky block letters. Every local video shop had one. Even if you never dared go in, you knew it was there. A forbidden zone. A place kids weren't allowed but were endlessly curious about. You'd drift by slowly, trying to act casual as you hovered near it, pretending to be deeply invested in the synopsis on the back of Short Circuit 2 or Crocodile Dundee, but really, you were angling for a glimpse past the curtain. Maybe you'd catch a glimpse of a bright pink spine, a VHS case with a half-naked woman on the cover, or a scandalously suggestive title. The sort of stuff that existed more as rumor than reality. And if the owner caught you loitering too long, he'd give you that look. Not angry, but knowing, like he remembered being your age and doing the same thing. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. That was enough to make you shuffle back to the Disney section. As for the men who ran these places, they always seemed a little off. Not dangerous, not threatening, just odd. There was always something in the way they moved or talked. They had deep horror knowledge, always pushing strange titles you'd never heard of, and they seemed to live in their shop. Some were probably harmless eccentrics, but the rumors said otherwise. In every town, it was the same. You'd hear about the guy at the local shop, Movie Magic or Video Vault or Real Time, who got shut down because he had tapes he wasn't supposed to have. Nobody knew if it was just banned horror like I Spit on Your Grave or Cannibal Holocaust, or if it was something worse. The stories got exaggerated with every telling. Maybe it was just a bootleg copy of Faces of Death. Maybe it was something that could get you on a list. You didn't ask too many questions, but you always wondered. The staff, meanwhile, were a breed of their own, usually a mix of dropout energy and cinephile obsession. They weren't always friendly, but they were always passionate. Ask about Hellraiser, and their whole face would change. You'd go from stranger to comrade in an instant. Suddenly, you were deep in a conversation about Clive Barker, practical effects, and whether the sequel was any good. Sometimes they'd recommend something weird and old, and you'd take it home just because they seemed so damn sure about it. A lot of times, it was crap. Sometimes, it was magic. At the same time, the smell of a video rental shop was like nothing else. It hit you the second the door opened. It was this weird blend of warm plastic, carpet glue, and whatever cleaner they used on the display racks. Mixed in was a faint hint of stale popcorn and that dusty, mechanical scent that came from old electronics. It didn't smell good exactly, but it smelled like movies, and it stuck with you. Some stores had TVs mounted near the ceiling, looping trailers for whatever was hot that week. Usually something like Universal Soldier or Free Willy. There was always a quiet whir in the background too, either a tape rewinding behind the counter or some old fan keeping the back room from overheating. The carpet was always industrial grade, gray or blue with weird patterns, just worn down enough to squeak a little under your sneakers. The lights were usually too bright, humming above you in flickering fluorescent strips. It made everything feel both oddly sterile and incredibly alive. Anyway, renting wasn't just a transaction, it was a ritual. You'd pile into the car with your siblings, parents, or friends, clutching a crumpled $5 bill, hoping the movie you wanted wasn't already out. Sometimes it was. Then you'd argue over backups. Someone would want a comedy, someone else a cartoon. Maybe there was a fight over The Sandlot again. If you were lucky, your dad would give you the nod and let you get something more grown up. Once, mine slipped me The Terminator, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't tell your mother." That tape felt heavier than it should have. And games. Games were sacred. You didn't buy them, you rented them. It was cheaper and riskier. You might get a banger like Mega Man X, or you might get stuck with some busted cart that wouldn't load past the title screen. A lot of those games came in generic black plastic cases, or beaten up cardboard sleeves with peeling labels. Some still had old price stickers. Some had someone else's name scribbled in Sharpie on the back. You'd rent it anyway. You'd play it all weekend. And when Tuesday came around, you rewound your tape, bagged your games, and walked back into that weird-smelling temple of stories and static, just to do it all over again. Of course, your return to the store would carry the weight of those heavy words, rewind or be judged. It wasn't just a slogan. It was a quiet, unspoken law. You returned your tape unrewound, and you knew what you had done. The shame wasn't loud or dramatic. It was worse. It was a raised eyebrow from the clerk. A sigh you weren't supposed to hear. A little sticker on the case that suddenly seemed accusatory. Be kind, rewind. You'd seen it 100 times, maybe even laughed at it once, but now it stared back at you with cold judgment. Some stores fined you, some didn't. But either way, you felt the weight of your laziness. The rewind machine, that clunky gray box behind the counter, had a sound, a sharp high-speed whir that meant your failure had to be corrected before someone else could enjoy the movie. It wasn't just about tape integrity, it was etiquette. Rewinding was like saying thank you or holding a door. It was basic manners in the sacred realm of the rental store. If you forgot, you learned fast. And once you learned, you never made that mistake again. Because in the world of VHS, to not rewind was to break the social contract. You weren't just returning a tape. You were returning it ready for the next person. That was the deal. Sadly, the end of the video rental store didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly. You noticed fewer people in the aisles, fewer copies of new releases. The staff started looking a little less sure, the shelves a little less full. DVDs showed up like shiny, cleaner, and smaller intruders, with their chapters skipping and flashy menus. VHS tapes got pushed to the back corners of the store, like old relatives no one wanted to visit. And then Netflix showed up in your mailbox, just a red envelope. Soon enough, Blockbuster closed one by one, independence even faster. The place you once visited weekly became a space for a mattress store or a gym, or worse, a payday loan center. If you were lucky, you caught the final clearance, picked up a few tapes for $1, held the box in your hand knowing full well you'd never watch it again, but you wanted to own it, just to say you had, just to remember. But they didn't vanish completely. Not really. They live in the way you still pause over the continue watching row on a streaming service, somehow less excited than you were walking into a dusty store with flickering lights. They live in attics and basements, in cracked clamshell cases, in old posters curled at the edges. They live in that moment when you stumble on an old tape and instinctively check if it's been rewound. They live in you. Because those stores weren't just about renting movies. They were about identity. They were places you shaped your taste, discovered who you were, or at least who you wanted to be. Maybe you were the kid who always picked horror, even though you weren't supposed to. Maybe you went for romantic comedies every single time. Maybe you tried to rent an 18-plus film with your mate's ID, and the girl at the counter just laughed and handed it over anyway. Maybe you were there for the games, not the films. Maybe you were just there for the posters. It didn't matter. It was your place, your routine, your time. If you were a 90s kid, you remember not just the movies, but the ritual. Walking the aisles, arguing with your siblings. The last-minute switch at the counter, holding a VHS tape like it was a golden ticket. Heading home with snacks, dimming the lights, hitting play. That moment of static before the previews. That feeling, that's what we lost. But at the end of the day, for those who held on to those $1 clamshells and still have a functioning VCR hidden somewhere at the back of the garage, you'll always have that chance to rewind the tape, hit that play button, and watch the warm memories of a simpler time and a reminder of the way we were play out on your TV screen over and over again.
Come along, let's sing, where the joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the magic, it's true. Channel 199X, we're here just for you.